Well, hello, everybody. And here we are back again for a further installment in our intriguing series, Interview with the Exorcist. I'm John Barnwell here in the greater metropolitan Detroit area, along with Dr. Douglas Gabriel. And we're going to continue on in this story. Then we've already touched on some points of high strangeness, and I have a feeling that we're not done yet. How you doing there, Doug?
Excuse me, sorry. Um, the high strangeness, that remark always just cracks me up. It's like, supernatural paranormal. And yes, that is where we're going today. The highest of strangeness, as a matter of fact. I'm doing very well, thank you. And thanks. You got a new Hawaiian shirt on. Every time I see Hawaiian shirts, it takes me back to living on the Big Island of Hawaii.
It's funny because I thought of Hawaii. Uh, you know, uh, I thought I put on a shirt so I looked like a big Kahuna Howley.
Yes, then that's a story that I will get to. When I got to Hawaii, the last student of the last kahuna was searching for a person who had what was called the well, there's no other way around it, the penis of Io, and it was a crystal. It's a rock, and he's been waiting for it. And he came over and he saw these crystals I was working with, healing somebody, and he says, "Oh my gosh, here it is! I had this crystal that resembled that extremely." And so he was like the last of the kahunas, but they didn't allow kahunas to go on past the time of the Great Eclipse, which I was there for the Great Eclipse on the Big Island. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Today, I realize as I'm telling this that it is so difficult now for me to say, talk about Waldorf education or to talk about what we learned at the Anthroposophic Institute, the Waldorf Institute, or to put these things in perspective for people. And um, for a while, Michael McKibben and I did some interviews where he would basically do what he does on the phone with me for the last 6 years, which is he goes, "Okay, I got a question for you. Exactly what does an angel look like?" And then I have to explain it to him in terms that that an engineer, he's a civil engineer, that a civil engineer could understand. Someone who believes in math, someone who believes there's a thing called space and another thing called time, linear time. And that doesn't exist in these worlds I'm talking about. So I have attempted, and people really appreciated some of the um, dogged, naive questions that he would ask me again and again to make me be specific. And I so appreciate that you're not asking me to go into all those specifics because it would probably lose some of our followers who subscribed here. So the deal is, I'm going to try today to describe what one experiences when one is clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. What do you think about that, John?
Well, it's within the tradition itself to speak in picture language. And so you can go back, and Rudolf Steiner is very, very elaborate on this subject. And he said that in the fourth century, which was that critical juncture of 333 A.D., that people had begun to lose the capacity to have the ability to see auras, and that they were dropping into the material life of the senses to the point to where that's when the problems really began, and the church began to get into quarrels over so many different points that wouldn't even have been addressed before that period of time because of the faculty that people had. But we always try to emphasize moving into the future. And the lecture cycle that Douglas reminded me of the other day, it's nature and spirit beings, their effects in our visible world. And in the first part, the so-called dangers of occult development. It was in November 5th of 1907 in Vienna. But in there, it takes us to the crux of this whole issue. And he says, and I quote, "Where has the fire that was burning on the earth now gone? Where is it? It is in your blood. All the warmth that has been inside the human beings and the animals was and is the fire glow of the earth. And once you will be able to transform your blood again so that it shines. And this will be the case when the human larynx will be transformed into the Holy Grail. Then the human beings will once again send out an abundance of light. If someone now immerses himself into a picture like this one, then he can achieve clairvoyance, clairaudience. I wish to point to the introduction of the Apocalypse of John, which states, "The revelation of Jesus Christ that God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place." These are the pictures that have been used for development in Rosicrucian schools. The clairvoyant must learn to decipher such pictures. The development of the earth will be the Word, and the Word will be with man, and man will create human beings through the Word. End quote.
From images to sounds to the word, that is exactly the process that you'll find in every spiritual high-level training for consciousness, for mind development. Images, sounds, and the word. And so it's funny that you should choose that quote, because that's really the theme of what I have to present, so that I can attempt to describe severely inadequately what it's like to enter into the realm of the angels, the archangels, and the archai, and how exactly to do that. And so what he just pointed out in that, what Steiner just pointed out in that wonderful indication, is also that the chalice starts in the heart, but it rises up to the throat, and then it goes up even higher until you are completely ascended. But to do so, that's long in the future. But do we have those three capacities John's always talking about, the heart, the throat, and the brow? Do we have those now? We do. And I'm going to try to describe them. But before I do, I have to say that is essentially opening up what is called moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition. But before we get there, because those are in fact, one might, as a civil engineer, consider them to be senses on top of the five senses. So when I say, start describing these things to people, and then I use references to Rudolf Steiner's 12 senses, they look at me like I'm insane. Well, those are just the beginning ones you need. That doesn't even count the super sensible ones. It doesn't count all the ones I could rattle off right now that you'd have to make sense of what's rushing at you as kind of a chaos of pictures. So in the ancient mysteries, as John said, it was through images, it was through speech, and particularly the oral tradition, and through music. And in the end, it's through the word. And how is the word described? The word is not just speaking. It's speech that becomes immediately action, instantaneously, that when the word is spoken. You would call that intuition. You would call that the creative force. God spoke creation into existence. Same thing with most of the religions. There was some being who spoke it into existence, whether through, Wainamoinen and casting the spells that created all things, or the St. John's Gospel referring to the Logos, the Word. So I have to describe this for you. First off, let me give you the long and the short of it. In your body, if you want to see angels, archangels, and archai, two ways to see them for sure that I know of, outside of yourself, and you have to rise up to that. It's not given to you. The angels don't say, "Hey, look over here. I'm going to blow your mind and I'm going to fry your brain. Come on, hey, look over here." No, that isn't the way it works. You have to rise up to that level, and you have to be prepared, or else you will come back blind and deaf and unable to move, paralyzed. So you want to see an angel, you can go out or you can go in. The easiest way is to go in. So angels, archangels, archai. Where would you see Christ, though? Christ is the I am. And your I am is in your body. And when you go to sleep, where is it? It's outside of your body. So you have the capacity to go in and out. And you have to find the integration factor through Christ. Without that, none of this is going to it doesn't do me any good to tell you how to contact an angel. Now, mind you, some people, after hearing this or something similar to this, all of a sudden, they're psychic. How many psychic readers did I train? I don't know, but I can tell you that it only takes the golden moment of illumination, like Jakob Burma had when he was a cobbler in Silesia, I believe it was. And he looked at a pewter bowl in a window, and the light shone on it just right. It went in and it illuminated him. And then he spoke multiple languages and wrote some of the greatest mystical books ever written. So it only takes one tiny itsy bitsy second of an archive affecting your life to change it, sometimes forever. But go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden you walked into the next room and you become aware of all this activity of which you were unconscious. And that's essentially what takes place is you bring the consciousness to your waking consciousness, that you have this continuity of consciousness. It's referred to in esotericism, so that when somebody gets to a certain stage of development, that they have continuity of consciousness. And when they go to sleep, they consciously go into the spiritual world, whereas the normal individual, the ordinary individual, they go unconscious because that is crossing the threshold right there. And so you have a lesser guardian of the threshold, and you have a greater guardian of the threshold. And the greater guardian, of course, is when you go to sleep, because you never remember what time you go to sleep, because that's the big kahuna. But then when you wake up, it's like very often it's like the lights come on and you're right there, and for that moment you could see more of what was your life of dream than you will even a few moments later. And so can we take up our wakefulness to be able to cognize what we've been through and eventually bring it to consciousness?
Absolutely. If you can wake up in your thinking, you might have the chance to bring moral development into your thinking. And when your thinking aligns with angels, then those are the archetypes of the Greeks, the living archetypes. And aligning yourself with them then can create what Steiner calls moral imagination. But that's waking up on your own thinking. How many people even know they think, let alone to look at the process of thinking, not the thoughts? Those are probably images or such things. You have to wake up on the process. What is if you could understand the process of your own thinking, guess what? You'd encounter an angel. Not only your guardian angel, you'd encounter your own angel coming to you from the future saying, well, it's about time you woke up, little baby, because, I'm ready to give you all these gifts from the future, which the angels have to give to you by using your brain. Excuse me, that's not true. Using your thinking. See, that's one of those problems of materialism. When you think that your thinking is in your brain, that's a big mistake. So when you use your mind, your thinking, it's an antenna for the angels. Then if you could take that wakefulness at that moment, move it into your heart where you usually dream your feelings and wake that up, you'd encounter an archangel, and it would sound like the harmony of the spheres. In some cases, if you're a bad person that happens accidentally, it sounds like the din of hell. Pretty much the same with the images. If you're up here and you get into the realm of the angels, which you do every night when you go to sleep and you enter into theta brainwave, just before sleep, delta brainwave, you enter into their realm. And if you could watch it, matter of fact, this is your challenge. If you want to be an initiate and go from an aspirant to an initiate, just as John said, it's the big kahuna. Watch what happens to your consciousness when you go to sleep. And when you do, it is the ultimate spiritual lesson. And it's the lesson I hope to indicate to you today is the way to contact these beings. What happens when you go to sleep? You surrender. You're thinking, feeling, and willing. You surrender. Well, surrender to what? Emptiness? As Steiner said in those exact lectures you're talking about, probably the reappearance of Christ and the etheric, where he talks about the year 333. And he says, basically, at that point, humans started to sink into the material world so far that the spirit no longer existed. And as John pointed out, they no longer had natural clairvoyance. So they couldn't contact these beings, let alone have the language to speak with them. And I was going to say, unfortunately, because that's the way it really is. I'm unfortunate to have known that language since I was a child. I played with angels much more readily than I played with other children, and I thought human beings were really. I felt like I was an alien, and that humans were like, man, why did they send me here? Is there some mission I'm supposed to learn? Watching these confused people who don't know that they're thinking, they're feeling, and willing are three different parts of themselves, and that their ego is separate and gets to control that. And if they don't get all three aligned, they're just a mess. This is what I was thinking in my earliest thoughts as a child. So I want to read something which I read the other day with Tyler when we closed out the show. And it is the meditation for teachers for the teachers who run a Waldorf school. And this is basically the same meditation we used to use for a Goethean conversation, where we try to solicit the help of an angel, beg an angel, not through a ritual of a spell, not through, what do they call it when you try to bring forth an elemental being, which is fine, but those are below you. That's not human. We want to bring in the superhuman beings, the angels, archangels, archai, the superhumans from Venus, Mercury, and Vulcan, our own future angel, archangel, and archai, and Christ into the work of the Waldorf School so we'd help the children appropriately. So this meditation teaches you that the way that those three, what's called the third hierarchy, the third rank of the hierarchy, the angels, the archai, the archangels, the archai, how they work together in the human being. Because you might think, oh, well, if I could just meet an angel, that'd be good. No. You want to meet someone higher than that. You want to hear the archangels. You want to know the intuition of the archai and align yourself with the time spirits through a direct intuition. That's what you really want. That's how a psychic reader works. That's how going across the threshold works. That's how transcendence works. That's how ascension works. It's also how you meet, as I'm going to say in the end, the second coming of Christ, which is highly confused. But after I try to lay the groundwork here, I'm going to try to address that. So this is the meditation Steiner gave to Waldorf teachers to awaken them on how to bring an angel, archangel, and archai into the room during their planning sessions for the Waldorf School. We wish to form our thoughts in such a way that we may be conscious that behind each of you stands his angel, gently laying his hands on the heads of each. This angel gives you the strength which you need. Above your heads, there sweep the circling archangels. They carry from one to the other what each has to give the other. They unite your souls. Thereby, you are given the courage of which you stand in need. Out of this courage, the archangels form a chalice. The light of wisdom is given to us by the exalted beings of the archai, who are not limited to the circling movements, but who, coming forth from primal beginnings, manifest themselves and disappear into primal distances. They reveal themselves only in the form of a drop of light in this place. Into the chalice of courage there falls a drop of light, enlightening our times, bestowed by the ruling spirit of our age. And of course, that spirit of our age is the Archangel Michael, who is ascended to the realm of the archai. So there it is. If you can work it properly, and even if you bring in the angels and the archangels, what are you going to get? A drop of the spirit that comes out of space. And there's no space and time happening here. Obviously, it comes from primal beginnings, goes to primal ends. It's only there for a second, but enlightens you for how long? Permanently? How long did Jakob Burma's enlightenment happen after a 1 second exposure to light going into his mind in the right way? That's all it took. If you could understand one single beam of light coming from the sun, you would transcend. It's as simple as that. But if you don't know that the angels use your mind as an antenna to communicate to you, and as soon as you become selfless and empty and surrender, the angels can start to fill your mind with higher thinking. Now, how do you know this happens? Because it happens. And when it happens, there's no mistaking it. And anyone that it's ever happened to can look at somebody else and see whether it's ever happened to them too. For instance, if an artist meets an artist, do they know it? Oh, every single time. Every time. Why? Because they're persnickety and they're sensitive and temperamental like the other artists. So here's someone in the room, taking up some of their space, because artists, what are they? They're very centered on themselves. And when they meet somebody else, an artist, they know it. So if you meet someone who's inspired, I'm talking about really inspired people, they would know if another person was inspired, because inspiration comes from the heart. It comes from the archangels. It comes from your feelings, but higher feelings. When higher feelings are transformed through the archangels, which is really the speech of the planets, you could say. It's the harmony of the spheres. So when your speech is so filled with warmth and light and harmony, it is possible that you can literally be speaking the language of the archangels. Now, generally, an archangel is called a folk spirit, and it's the spirit that, like the description here, connects other people to other people. It doesn't have to be a different language. It doesn't have to be a different nation. The person sitting across from you may be speaking English, but they may be on another world. And it will take an archangel for you to actually connect with them, because that's how far out they are. And when that light comes, will everybody see the drop of light? No. I've been in too many meetings where the drop of light was this big and it was glowing and it was radiant and it was incredible, and people didn't see it. Because why? You're not seeing it. And that's what we'll go to next. We'll go to Rudolf Steiner's description of the 12 senses, so that I can give you a picture of what it's like when these kind of things actually do happen. When you see the images of the angels, when you hear the voices of the archangels, when you see that drop of light that is going to intuitively inspire you for a long, long time, what is it that is actually perceiving those things? We'll talk about that after John has something to say.
Yeah, because perhaps more accurately than talking about seeing, it's participating, because it's something that is there, and there's that of you that is of that level of being. And so when you are capable of rising to conscious precipitation in this process, then that's when the transformation happens. And it can happen in the most unusual ways, and it may happen by surprise, just to give you a clue, like it has to a lot of people I've met. And there's people all over the world that have had spontaneous awakenings. St. Paul isn't the only one. But when you look at that, I used to know this chef in Windsor, Chef Osa, and he used to be the chef at the Palace of the Raj in India, and he's a Brahmin, and he had this mantra. There's this on the ceiling, this long extension that ran the whole length of the restaurant, and he had written on there in Sanskrit this prayer, right? And he said that the way the story goes is that the prayer was secret, and that if you told anybody, that you would be condemned to millions of incarnations before you'd receive enlightenment. And this one guy was there, and he received it. He ran out in the street and started telling everybody, and he became liberated immediately.
Yeah, I remember that restaurant. It was probably the 100-syllable mantra, which, is supposed to heal all illnesses, but can make you crazy if you don't practice it with morality. So in thinking, you have 4 senses. According to Rudolf Steiner, the 12 senses are broken down into 3 groups, and the 3 groups are ruled by thinking, feeling, and willing, what we were just talking about, the angels, the archangels, the archai. And we could analyze this for numerous podcasts all day long. So thinking is, and the senses that you've never heard of, I'll try to describe, okay? So with thinking, you have the ego sense. In other words, when you're talking to somebody and they're actually a locust person, or they're not a human, or they don't have a spirit, might not have a soul, you won't notice an ego. How can I describe someone to someone that in the spiritual world, when you meet a being, it either has an ego or it doesn't? Can I describe to you right now what it's like to meet a person on the earth that doesn't have an ego? I think you've probably all met those people, right? Well, imagine that as being a sense organ, so that you can tell what kind of ego, what level of ego, where the ego is. Is this a actor, so that I'm just looking at one of their personas or whatever? No, you can know whether they're a real ego, and an ego, because we have one, an I am, can recognize another ego. Then there's the sense of thought. Well, I think everyone would agree there's such a thing as thought, and you can see your thoughts, and so you can have a sense perception of your thought. That one's okay. The sense of word, well, that's not just the sense of speaking, that's the sense of meaning. So they can show you a page of garbled words, and 9 out of 10 times, anybody can tell you whether it's a real language or not, because they can somehow determine, without knowing what those letters mean, or that whether it's a language or not, whether it has meaning or not. Same thing. When someone speaks, is there meaning there, or is it just a word salad? But that's also the logos. So when we say thinking, think everything in the universe was created by thinking. It was created, and when it manifested, it was created through the word. So when you're talking about the sense of the word, this isn't like hearing. This is you could hear someone speak all day, but then you could say, was there any meaning to it? And then you could reflect upon that, and it might be one sentence. So when you encounter another being in the spiritual world, a spiritual being above us, and they speak to you, then it starts to get very interesting, and you realize what the thinking is. It is a direct conduit to the universal cosmic all. And then, of course, with thinking, there's the sense of hearing. Without hearing, you would never arrive at thinking. Matter of fact, some people say the only thing that you think are the words that you speak, and the words are signifiers for your perception. I don't believe that, but that shows you the power of hearing. And to begin with, hearing was one of the oldest senses, and the ear was one of the oldest organs, because it's all vibration. And if you could hear, you can hear the angels sing. You could, every time you encounter them, you'll hear all kinds of things that you've never heard on the face of the earth before. Then in the realm of feeling, you have warmth. Okay, we can understand that. But also the warmth of the being. When you meet somebody and they say, oh, they're very cold. Well, did they say something cold? No. Did they look cold? Were they shivering? No. Well, how do you know they were cold? You know, don't you? You just know. The sense of sight, sense of taste, sense of smell are also feelings. Because with all those things, what John thinks is a sweet smell, I may think is awful. So it's all personal. So feeling is an inward, and it's an inward sense and an outward sense. So you're interacting with the outer world, but it also has an inward reflection. And those are the normal senses, but they're very high. Taste itself could tell you the nature of the spiritual beings and the elementals in anything you put into your mouth, if you were highly developed. Now, the sense of thinking, or what we call thinking, is an outer sense, because usually we're trying to look at something outside of ourselves with that and then reflect upon it. The sense of feeling is both inward and outward. Sense of willing is all inward. And you go, well, wait, why would that be? Willpower. I do things in the world. That's the world. Well, here are the other senses associated with it that might help you understand the will. But the will is the most mysterious aspect of the human being. It cannot be described, cannot be explained. And if you don't believe it, simply take a stethoscope and put it on one of your muscles and start moving your muscle. You're going to hear a symphony of sound. Magnify that times all of your muscles, all of your organs, all moving at once, and you would hear a sound that Rudolf Steiner said that you would immediately die if you could hear what all is going on in your body. And that's why when you go into your body with willing, you're going to experience all kinds of things that you've never experienced in the outside world. So with willing, it's the sense of balance. But this is balance like in harmony also. So if you see someone walking and they're not in balance, I've been trained through a certain anthroposophic training where you can analyze a person by simply watching them walk and whether they're balanced, whether they're on their toes, on their heel, whether they're on their, the way they walk, are they emphasizing one side or the other? So balance is like, it's a hierarchy. It's the hierarchy of harmony. So when you're looking at that, you're looking at a higher being who is manifesting through that person through their will. Then there's movement, and that's a higher being. That's the dunamis, how they move, especially a child running or walking, the cadence, the rhythm, that whole thing. As you're watching them, you basically are watching their karma. Rudolf Steiner said, if you stand behind somebody and you watch the way they walk or they run, and you look at their gait, you can possibly look right directly into their past incarnations. And then there's the sense of life. Well, is it alive if it's just a UFO that's light flickering in the sky? A clairvoyant can look at that and say, there's nothing alive in it, right? Because it's a sense, it's a super sensible organ that can be developed so that you can perceive life in other worlds, not just this world. And then the sense of touch you might think is hedonistic and sensualism. But no, the sense of touch is one of the greatest senses that gives us, it's also the largest organ in the body is your skin. And so it gives us more information than we can possibly imagine. And through it, we actually can take in nutrition and every other thing. So the sense of touch is huge. Those are the 12 senses. So when I say I saw it, as John pointed out, I should say I participated with it. I witnessed it. It passed through me. I passed through it. And that's what you would have to do to encounter an angel. So if you're looking at an angel outside of you, that's an aberration usually, or some gift from heaven. But if you're looking at an angel inside of you, you're looking at your higher thoughts. If you're looking at, say, Putin speaking to another world leader, and the ideology, the real meaning of what they're saying back and forth might tap you into an archangel in the outer world, but why not just go into the inner world and listen to the harmony of the spheres in your organs? You don't have to look outside of yourself to find the Archai, the time spirit, who is now the Archangel Michael. If you look inside and you find Christ, well, that's who Michael is leading you to. So if you want to go to these levels of the angel, archangel, archai, the 12 senses those 4 senses for the angels, those would have to be all engaged, aligned, and coherent. But if all 12 senses are all engaged and all aligned, and you know the difference between your thinking, feeling, and willing, and you are a moral being, and you have Christ on the throne of your heart, and you have love there, you can actually use this methodology to say, okay, I'm going to encounter those beings through my own inner nature. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't need a teacher. You don't need a master or a priest or a priestess. All you need is the ever-present help of the spiritual world, which is all of the saints you've ever known in all religions, all of the great moral beings. As John said, they're all perfected and they're kept in the realm of Shambhala. So when you contact these angels, archangels, and archai, you're contacting your etheric body. In the outer world on the earth, that's called the Shambhalic realm, Shambhala. It's the realm where Christ is now appearing as his second coming. But if you go on the inside, you're looking at your own etheric body. And it is the mission of initiation to be able to consciously separate your astral body, your desire body, and your ego from your etheric body and your physical body consciously. And then you can stand back and look through the astral light into the wisdom that's written into your etheric body. And that's really the body of love. So if you have the faith in your thinking, if you have the love in your etheric body, and if you have hope in your physical body, and that only comes from absolute faith, that's beyond faith. That means you take actions again and again and again and again that demonstrate that you believe. So the only other question left is, do you believe? Do you want to start that journey? And we'll go to that in the next segment of this conversation when we're going to talk about St. Paul and his experience with meeting Christ in the etheric realm, or what is called the Damascus event.
What a wonderful tapestry of content that you've woven. And that's some of the material that I deal with in my books. In fact, I have a diagram that lays out everything that Douglas just represented regarding the 12 senses. So yes, it's an awakening is what it essentially is. But there's different levels of participation that become extremely interesting. And you can go to Emanuel Swedenborg, his speech of angels exterior and interior. And he says, I have been in company with the angels, and it has been granted to become acquainted with their speech by experience. There are 4 kinds of speech, like as there are 4 kinds of angels: a material speech of visible objects, and an interior speech of visual things, which are speeches of the understanding or of the thought. There's a speech of the affections of the body and a speech of the affections of the heart, which are speeches of the will or of the affection. Some who are able to be in the speech of the affections of the body converse with me and express my affections when relating to the body in suitable terms, at which I was astonished that they were able to express these in terms of perfectly suitable ones. And the interior and exterior affections of the body without exception. They were delightful and charming, and conjoined with many affections which were expressed. Certain spirits from a distance heard and understood, but I, being in the natural state, did not hear the words, but I perceived the affections which they uttered in the words. This speech cannot be understood by those who are invisible things only, as they also said. And it goes on and on. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. But there you have a testimony of somebody, and this is from a long time ago, because we're talking about, this is from his spiritual diary. It was published in 1902, but this is, Emanuel Swedenborg passed away on March 29th of 1772. So there are people that can function in advance of the rest of mankind, the pioneers of consciousness, like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Novalis and some of these leading figures. But it's important to understand that you allow yourself the artistic creativity to be able to represent your relationship to the spiritual world and not get locked into trying to abstractly represent these things, because that will prevent you from accessing.
Absolutely. Funny, we didn't coincide, we didn't coordinate these quotes. Just what I said, there's 4 languages. Oops, that's 5. 4. There's the angel, the archangel, the archai, and Christ. That's the ego, the physical, etheric, astral, and ego. And in our books, the trilogy that Tyler and I wrote together through inspiration, as it were, and then it became an intuition because it manifested. And because it's truth, it's going to exist for a long time. It's not dated. It's not in space and time. It's even beyond consciousness. And that's what I'm trying to get at today. How do I get you beyond earthbound consciousness? How do I get you beyond gray shadow thinking of materialism that pulls you down into matter? How do I get you beyond knowing that when you look in the outer world, you're supposed to see the Father God has left a remnant of his creation for us to look at as it's dying. And then when you look also in the outer world, you should see the Holy Spirit, which is enlivening that which is dying. And then you should see into yourself, when you look in yourself, Christ. And that's the issue. That's the issue. If you're going to separate your astral body from your etheric body, what are you going to see in your etheric body? So I've told you in my trips around everywhere and meeting with spiritual people, I always ask them, where's Christ now? And that's the determining factor. That tells me everything about them. And I say, and then if they don't get the point, then I say, well, there's a living body of the earth, right? I mean, there's like this being Gaia, right? That she's alive, right? Okay, well, where's Christ? And if they don't know that Christ is in the living body of the earth, that's the reason we didn't die in 333 AD, because Christ, through the mystery of Golgotha, redeemed the physical. Now Christ is redeeming the etheric body of the earth, and that is called either the realm of spiritual economy, it's called the realm of Shambhala, it's called many, many things, but Steiner says that the great master beings go to the realm of Shambhala to get reinvigorated so that they can come back and help humanity on a very constant basis. He also says that since, well, he says 1930s, 1940s, 1945, he says since 1933, he says since the beginning of the 20th century, human beings are now able to see Christ no longer like they saw him in Palestine in the physical body, but now in his etheric body. Now, mind you, Christ has perfected the physical, redeemed the earth, redeemed the physical material world. Now he's doing that with the etheric world. But the etheric world is where all life comes from on the earth. And of course, where does that come from? That comes from the sun. But Christ has descended from the sun through the Elohim, and he descended from the Trinity to the Elohim, and then down to earth. Now, to understand this concept, to understand what I'm about to tell you, I have to explain something complicated, which I've only explained a few times before in many other talks, As Christ was coming to the earth, he went through, and I've written articles on this in case you want more detail, but he descended from the realm of the Elohim, which is right above the realm of the Archai. So he descended through the realm of, he had to have descended to the realm of the Archai, the archangels, the angels, to the human. And he's the only being of the Trinity that is incarnating into the physical world per se, certainly as a human, and to live the suffering life as a human. But as he descended, when he was going through the realm of the Archai, he gave to humanity in the far past times the gift of standing upright when he was in the realm of the Archai, the gift of speech in the realm of the archangels, and the gift of thinking when he passed through the realm of the angels. Now, as I just said, thinking, feeling, and willing are antennas. But another way to look at it is your ancient gift given to you when Christ gave the gift of the Archai of standing upright, gives to you what is called, Steiner calls, the Saturn man in you. I'd rather call it the old Saturn man in you, and not man, but human, but you know what I mean. Or when he was passing through the realm of the archangels, he gave to you, and is in you right now. It's that antenna that can get morphic resonance directly through the vibration, the frequency, the intuitive action of higher spiritual beings working through you. So you have an old Saturn man in you. You have an old sun man in you. And that's when the archangels were human and they made a donation, and that gave you your feeling. And then you have the old moon in you, and that is, so it's physical, etheric, astral, So you're given these gifts, physical, etheric, astral, which gave you, in a way, the recapitulation is standing upright, speaking, and thinking, which are the gifts of the Archai, the archangels, and the angels right now. So the past is happening right now in you. You have 4 different beings speaking 4 different languages. Matter of fact, more than 4, but just 4 for sure: physical, etheric, astral, and ego. So as Christ is coming down, he also brought with him a vehicle for manifesting in those realms. And Steiner calls that being the Nathan soul. Kabbalah calls it Adam Kadmon, the original Adam who did not incarnate at the same time as the Adam came to the earth. Another exact copy was kept in heaven. And that copy was used by Christ descending through the Archai, the archangels, and the angels into the human form to then give gifts to the human being. Steiner calls this the pre-earthly deeds of Christ, and he wrote a lecture called by that name. So if you don't know that, you can't get what I'm about to say. What I'm about to say, and this is just the preface, by the way, and no one talks about this.
And that's the only lecture it's in.
He makes a slight reference someplace else, but that's it. And so I've gotten into some hot water with anthroposophists quoting this, and they didn't know about it and they didn't understand it. So you can't, I don't know how you can understand being a Waldorf teacher, because standing upright, speaking, and thinking turned into writing, reading, and arithmetic. So if a child is having a problem with one of those, then you need to look into standing upright, speaking, and thinking, and you'll be able to help, to heal, to mitigate whatever that problem is. So without knowing this, and if you don't know that Christ surrounds every child up to age 3, so that's why they grow at such a phenomenal rate, a rate that never ever is repeated, and something that literally is incomprehensible to the human mind. That is a gift of Christ.
Well, if you just look at small children, I mean, we have some small children living next door. When they run around, it's as if they're dangling on strings held by the angels. I mean, the force of levity is just so profound as compared to the plotted earthly adult people walking around, you know?
And yeah, that plotting tells you all about them from their previous incarnations, because it's their willpower, it's the archive working in them. So yes, the children are up to age 5 still in the spiritual world. They are awake and they are in dreamless sleep. They're in a trance at the same time. Well, that's a paradox now, isn't it? But what's a trinity? It's a double or a triple paradox. What is having 4 languages that are spoken in you all at once, and you have to know where you're speaking from, or you won't comprehend what these beings are telling you. Plus, remember, the angels are going to be upside down, the archangels are going to be backwards, and the archai are going to be inside out. So unless you're willing to go into a realm where you have to be selfless, so it's like you're in a void. It's like you're in the emptiness of Tibetan Buddhism. And what do they say? Tibetan Buddhism has the fastest way to enlightenment, kind of like what Jakob Burma went through. That they say enlightenment comes in a flash, just like that description we gave of the archai, a drop of light in that chalice, boom, for a second, from defying time, space, and consciousness. Okay. So what is really happening there? That is simply opening yourself up as a chalice, as an empty chalice, to let these beings come in. When the angels come in, you know it. When you have a true moral imagination, it has intuition in it, which had to come up from your willpower, because you had to surrender, because you work. What you do is you meditate, you concentrate, you contemplate, you meditate, you pray hard, and then you stop and you become completely empty. That's what Tibetan Buddhists do. I've done 10,000 meditations in a row. One time I did a retreat, 100,000 meditations, one really long meditation, 100,000 times you have to do it, right? And then what happens? You go empty. And then when you're empty, what do you see? Images, you hear sounds, and you hear the spoken word. And that is the sign of not only nirvana and enlightenment, but paranirvana, which is a stage above that, and mahaparinirvana, which we call intuition. Those are the stages of imagination, inspiration, intuition. And they teach you exactly how to do it. And it's the exact same thing that Steiner teaches. And I've shown this in articles where I've taken the 7-limb practice of the Tibetan Buddhist and Knowledge of Higher Worlds and other books of Steiner, and show it's the exact same thing, except Steiner knew it intuitively and he made it applicable in our time, and he updated it. Because when you talk to these people and you say, where is Christ right now? They, Buddhists looks at you like you're out of your mind. And you say, no, let me describe Christ for you. And then I describe Christ as the living being of the earth. He is an embodiment of the wisdom and the love that a human being is supposed to embody as they grow into the likeness of him. And they go, oh, Avalokiteshvara. Or, they'll give
Chenrezig.
Chenrezig. Oh, Chenrezig. Yes, because they see it different. They see the same exact being. And as I've said before, the most clairvoyant people I know who got there by training are the Tibetan High Lamas and Geshes and Rinpoches. So Steiner gives us the path. But the path doesn't take studying his over 300 books. It takes going into your heart and using the inward path of supersensible perception, using all 12 and knowing that you're threefold, and that the second you go across the threshold, you're going to split into 3. And if you don't know, if your ego can't hold together your thinking, feeling, and willing in this world, it is not going to hold you together in the spiritual world if you're trying to get there. And if you're not moral, you're not going to get there anyway. You'll become unconscious. You'll go asleep and you'll have a dream, and maybe you bring back a vision if you're lucky. But the deal is, this is scary business. We've told you what happens when you reach the threshold. So seeing an angel is like, oh, whoa, it was rainbows and unicorns. No, it will terrify you. It will terrify you. Now, why do I have to preface all what I'm about to say with all of that? Because when Paul, who had fought against the Christians worse than anyone, he knew their doctrine better than they did, and he had killed a bunch of them, and he's riding on a road to go get some more out of Damascus, Jesus, or let's call it, and I want to make this decision.
On behalf of the Sanhedrin.
On behalf of the Sanhedrin. Christ, because he was a Jew. His name was Paul. His name was Saul.
But he was also initiated into the Greek tradition too.
And that's why Christ could come to him. So Christ Jesus came to him. And how does the experience of seeing the second coming of Christ in the etheric compare to Paul on the road to Damascus? It's exactly the same. So what happens? He first sees a light. It's so powerful, it knocks him from his horse, knocks him to the ground. And of course, what does he do? What I mentioned before, when you see an angel, you're going to put your head on the ground. You're going to bury your head in the dirt if you can, because if you look at that being with your eyes and you actually think you're still physical, it'll burn your eyes out. So, that's not what you want to do. Matter of fact, what happened to Paul? He went blind. And what did they say? Later, he had to go to Ananias, and Ananias had to come. Christ Jesus had to appear to him as a true follower and say, go to Saul, tell him to change his name to Paul, and you'll take away his blindness in the name of Jesus Christ. And so he removed them, and he said there were scales. Scales had grown on his eye from clairvoyantly seeing the manifestation of the second coming of Christ. Now, remember, Christ has already made his second coming to his apostles, and now he's making it to his worst enemy. But because he had been initiated, and he was in fact a moral being, but he hadn't met Christ, he needed to meet Christ in such a significant way that it would never leave him, it would permanently change him, and nothing could ever shake his belief in his experience. And that is what I'm telling you is the experience that I have had, Tyler's had. I had it many times when I was young. I had it numerous times when I was an adult. And in most of those times, now with Tyler, it's different. She may jump on and tell us. But in most of those times, it was because I was in a miserable condition. And Rudolf Steiner tells you that when you are in absolute hopelessness and you're facing evil and you believe that you have no power over evil, the only thing you have is faith in Christ. And guess what? He may, through the Holy Spirit, walk into your room and appear to you as he appeared to his apostles and manifest to you. That's one way. The other way is through initiation, and that is you see the light, it overwhelms you, you hear the sound, and the sounds are, I cannot describe them. You know how they say it's a cacophony of harmonic, beautiful things that rip you to pieces. So it's something that you want to love, but you know that by loving it, you yourself will be annihilated. Oh, nice song, huh? Well, that's the sound that it makes. And it rolls at you like a fluid cloud. And of course, all the earth has gone away. The old earth has passed away. Everything's passed away. The sky, the earth. You've passed away. You've died. You've been tortured. And this is the initiation path. And then you see this light rolling at you and you go, I know what's about to happen. Christ is coming. You actually hear the angels saying, Christ is coming. And then you hear the archangels making all this beautiful music and all this stuff, creating an atmosphere for Christ to appear in. And then Christ comes. But by then, you better have your head buried in whatever there is below you, because you can't look at this being, because Christ is higher than an archai. He is a solar being. To look at him would annihilate you. It would kill you if you were still alive. As a spiritual being, you'd have to be an archai to even look in the direction of Christ. That's the reason that only Michael, the archai of our time, the zeitgeist, the archangels who's risen up to that position, was able to look at Christ and being crucified, because he knew who Christ was. and to see his true glory, to see the fact that he was redeeming the entire earth and etherically then going to redeem the etheric earth. Michael was the only spiritual being who could look upon Christ on the cross. And so that's what happens. And once it happens, then you have to do what Paul did. He had to go to Ananias. Ananias had to teach him. It took days before he was no longer blind, before he was no longer so shook up. He had to learn the livingness, Rudolf Steiner says, of Christ. Not the theory, not the ideology, not the religion, but the livingness. So if you ask a true Christian, have you experienced meeting Christ Jesus? No matter what they say, if you have, you'll know if they're telling the truth. It's as simple as that. And so it's very easy to tell a Christian by their fruits, because all you have to say is something honest about the cosmic Christ, and see how they respond. And if they're just an ideology, Rudolf Steiner says there's 3 types of Jesus illness at this time. And in the psych wards, Father William and I, you know how many people we dealt with that said they saw Jesus Christ, and he was this brilliant, bright light that made them fall to the ground, be overwhelmed, this incredible, horrible noise, because why? They weren't moral. So it sounded like it sounds like the Tibetans when they're banging on their cymbals and their drums and ringing their bells and blowing those long horns. It sounds like hell, right? The din of hell. Well, if you're not moral, that's what it sounds like. But it's like, why do they look at pictures of naked women? So they don't have desire. Why do they listen to this horrible music? To prepare them to cross the threshold. And then what happened to Paul? He had to unpack it, as Tyler loves to say. After you had this experience, it may take you decades, many decades, to unpack what it is you experienced. Now, I know that sounds impossible, but that's that one drop of the Archai light gives you an example of what then might happen if you actually met Christ, saw Christ in the etheric, and said, I acknowledge your second coming. Because that's all you have to do. All you have to do is say, what I am supersensibly perceiving is true, but it's true, it's beautiful, it's good, or it is. And so there's nothing you can do about that. You are one with that. It comes into you and goes right through you. And afterwards, you are no longer a human being. You are a human being that has seen the second coming of Christ in the etheric realm. In Shambhala, you have peeked into heaven, and you know that you have the angels, archangels, and archai right there to teach you the languages that you need to know to understand how to change thinking, feeling, and willing into moral imagination, inspiration, intuition, or faith, love, and hope, or as John always likes to point out, wonder, awe, and reverence. And trust me, if you ever see an angel, you can actually never unsee it. Or, as I say, use your 12 senses. If you can have a moral imagination and encounter, witness, participate with an angel, it changes you permanently. And anyone who's ever had that encounter can see it in another person.
Rudolf Steiner says that whenever in Scripture they go up on the mountaintop, that it's referring to a certain supersensible mystery that's taking place. And if you go to the description that Rudolf Steiner gives, he goes to the transfiguration on the mount, and that the disciples with him see, they have an experience of Ezekiel, and they have an experience of Moses, and of transfigured Jesus Christ. And Rudolf Steiner says that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And here you have it as an image, because the way is Elijah, and the truth is that Moses, and the life is Jesus Christ himself. And so you have this, all 3 of these brought together as moral imagination, moral inspiration, and moral intuition in the modern terms of consciousness as to how you can approach this mystery. And so it's been such a wonderful conversation. It just keeps getting more and more developed, and we end up somehow managing to go even further than I thought we were going to. And that always makes me happy because there's nothing I like better than to be able to share this type of content. And so I want to thank Tyler Gabriel for bringing this all together. And I want to thank Dr. Douglas Gabriel for spending his whole life trying to figure out how he can explain this to you. And I want to thank everybody for showing up. And I look forward to seeing you again.